The rain hammered down on Lydia Garrison's back as she stumbled through the muddy streets of Wilson, Kansas, her dress soaked through, and her boots threatening to slip off her blistered feet with every desperate step. She had been walking for 3 hours since the stagecoach broke an axle 15 miles back, and the driver had told her to wait while he rode for help. But waiting meant missing her interview for the teaching position, and she had traveled all the way from Pennsylvania for this opportunity that could change everything about her destitute situation. The address scribbled on the damp paper in her trembling hand read 42 Maple Street, where Mrs. Henderson supposedly ran a boarding house for respectable young women, but the rain made the ink blur and run, and Lydia could barely make out the numbers on the weathered buildings as lightning split the darkening sky. She counted the buildings as best she could, her teeth chattering from cold and exhaustion, and when she reached what she thought must be the right place, she practically fell against the door, pounding with what little strength remained in her arms. The door swung open so suddenly that Lydia stumbled forward, catching herself on the doorframe, and found herself staring up at a man who definitely was not Mrs. Henderson. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with dark hair that fell just past his collar and eyes the color of whiskey that widened in surprise as he took in the sight of the drenched woman on his threshold. He wore a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms tanned from long hours in the sun and a pair of worn trousers held up by suspenders. "Please," Lydia managed to gasp out, her vision swimming as the exhaustion and cold finally caught up with her. "I need a room. Mrs. Henderson, is she here?" The man's confusion was evident as he glanced behind him into the modest but tidy home, then back at Lydia. "Madam, I think you've got the wrong place. There's no Mrs. Henderson here. This is my home." Lydia felt her heart sink as she looked past him, and realized that this was clearly a bachelor's residence, with none of the feminine touches or multiple rooms that a boarding house would have. She pulled the soggy paper from her pocket, trying to make sense of the smeared address, and felt tears of frustration mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I must have counted wrong. I am so sorry to disturb you. I will just..." Her words cut off as her knees buckled, and the world tilted sideways. Strong arms caught her before she hit the porch, and she heard the man's voice, deep and concerned, cutting through the fog that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness. "Easy there. You are not going anywhere in this condition." When Lydia's awareness returned, she found herself sitting in a chair near a crackling fireplace, wrapped in what appeared to be a man's coat that smelled of leather and sage. The warmth felt like heaven against her frozen skin, though her dress was still uncomfortably damp. The man was across the room, stirring something in a pot on the stove, and when he noticed she was awake, he brought over a cup of steaming coffee. "Drink this," he said, his voice gentler than she would have expected from someone so imposing. "You are half frozen." Lydia accepted the cup with trembling hands, grateful for the warmth spreading through her fingers. "I am so sorry. This is terribly improper. I should not be here." "Well, you are here, and sending you back out in that storm would be criminal." He pulled up another chair and sat down, maintaining a respectful distance. "I am Zachary Ramsey. Most folks call me Zach, and you are Lydia Garrison." She took a sip of the coffee, feeling it warm her from the inside. "I arrived in Wilson today for a teaching position interview tomorrow, but the stagecoach broke down, and I was supposed to go to Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, and I must have gotten the address wrong or counted the buildings incorrectly in the rain." Zach nodded slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. "Mrs. Henderson's place is on Pine Street, not Maple. Easy mistake in weather like this. But Pine Street is clear across town and it is getting dark. That storm is not letting up anytime soon. Lydia felt panic rising in her chest. "But I cannot stay here. It would be completely inappropriate. What would people think?" "I reckon people would think you had sense enough to get out of a storm," Zach said matter-of-factly. "Look, Miss Garrison, I understand your concern about propriety, but you can barely sit upright. You walk out there now, you will catch your death. My neighbor, Mrs. Talbot, is right next door. I will go fetch her to come sit as a chaperone if that makes you feel better." The practical solution eased some of Lydia's anxiety. "That would be very kind, Mr. Ramsey. I truly am sorry for this intrusion. Stop apologizing. It is not like you knocked on my door on purpose." He stood and grabbed a rain slicker from a hook by the door. "I will be right back. You stay put and get warm." While he was gone, Lydia took the opportunity to look around the room. It was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's home, with books stacked neatly on shelves and a pair of well-worn boots lined up by the door. The furniture was simple but well made, and everything had a place. Through a doorway, she could see what appeared to be a small bedroom, and she felt her cheeks flush at the thought of being alone with a strange man in such intimate quarters. Zach returned a few minutes later with a plump, kind-faced woman in her 60s who immediately took charge of the situation. "You poor dear," Mrs. Talbot clucked, already moving toward Lydia with maternal efficiency. "Zach told me what happened. Come with me. We are going to get you into some dry clothes. I have a dress that might fit you well enough for tonight." "I could not possibly impose," Lydia protested weakly, but Mrs. Talbot was already helping her to her feet. "Nonsense. Zach, you make yourself scarce while I help this young lady. Go check on your horses or something." Zach grabbed his hat and gave Lydia a reassuring nod before heading out into the rain again. Mrs. Talbot led Lydia into the bedroom and produced a simple cotton dress from a bag she had brought with her. "This belonged to my daughter before she married and moved to California. You are about her size. Now let us get you out of those wet things before you catch pneumonia." As Lydia changed with Mrs. Talbot's help, the older woman kept up a steady stream of conversation that helped ease the awkwardness of the situation. "Zach is a good man, one of the best in Wilson. Came here about 5 years ago and bought that little ranch just outside town. Works harder than any 3 men I have ever known. Keeps to himself mostly, but he is always the first one to help when someone needs it." "Does he live alone?" Lydia asked, then immediately regretted the question as it seemed too forward. Mrs. Talbot did not seem to mind. "He does now. Lost his parents to fever when he was younger, grew up working on different ranches before he saved enough to buy his own place. Never seen him courting anyone, which is a shame. A man like that should have a family." Once Lydia was dressed in dry clothes, Mrs. Talbot helped her hang her wet dress near the fire to dry, then settled into a chair with some knitting she had brought along. "Now you just rest, dear. Zach will probably make us some supper when he comes back in. He is actually quite a decent cook for a cowboy." Zach did return about 20 minutes later, soaked but carrying a basket of eggs and some vegetables from Mrs. Talbot's garden. He changed into dry clothes in another room, then set about making a simple but hearty meal of eggs, fried potatoes, and biscuits left over from breakfast. The 3 of them sat around the small table, and Lydia found herself relaxing despite the strangeness of the situation. "So you are here for a teaching position?" Zach asked as they ate. "Wilson could use a good teacher. The last one left to get married about 3 months ago, and the children have been making do with whatever education their parents can provide. I have been teaching at a small school in Pennsylvania for the past 2 years, Lydia explained, grateful to talk about something safe and professional. But the school closed when the town's main factory shut down and families started moving away. I saw the advertisement for the position here and thought it might be a new start. Wilson is a good town, Mrs. Talbot chimed in, growing steadily. We have got the railroad coming through, which brings commerce and families. The school board is very particular about who they hire, though. Mrs. Patterson runs the board, and she has high standards. Lydia felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. I hope I make a good impression tomorrow. I have my references and credentials with me, assuming they dried out properly. I am sure you will do fine, Zach said, and there was something in his tone that made Lydia look up and catch him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. He looked away quickly, focusing on his plate. More coffee. The evening passed more pleasantly than Lydia could have imagined given the circumstances. Mrs. Talbot regaled them with stories about Wilson's history and various residents, painting a picture of a community that was rough around the edges but fundamentally decent. Zach spoke little but listened attentively, occasionally adding a comment or answering a question. Lydia found herself stealing glances at him when she thought he was not looking, noticing the laugh lines around his eyes and the gentleness in his hands as he poured more coffee or passed the biscuits. When it grew late, Mrs. Talbot announced that Lydia would sleep in Zach's bed while he took the couch in the main room, and she herself would sleep in the chair to maintain propriety. Both Zach and Lydia protested this arrangement, but the older woman would not hear of anything else. I have slept in worse places, and I am too old to care about a stiff back in the morning, Mrs. Talbot declared. Now everyone to bed. Miss Garrison has an important interview tomorrow, and she needs her rest. Lydia lay in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the rain still drumming on the roof and the low murmur of voices from the other room as Zach and Mrs. Talbot spoke quietly. She should have felt uncomfortable or frightened, alone in a strange town in a strange man's house, but instead she felt oddly safe. There was something solid and dependable about Zachary Ramsey, something that made her want to know more about the quiet cowboy who had taken in a desperate stranger without hesitation. Morning arrived with weak sunlight filtering through the curtains and the smell of coffee brewing. Lydia dressed in her own clothes, which had dried by the fire overnight, and emerged to find Zach already up and making breakfast while Mrs. Talbot was nowhere to be seen. She went home about an hour ago, Zach explained when Lydia asked. Said she had things to attend to, but that I should make sure you got a proper breakfast before your interview. They ate together in companionable silence, and Lydia found herself hyper-aware of every movement Zach made, the way his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, the slight stubble on his jaw that suggested he had not yet shaved this morning. When she caught herself staring, she forced her attention back to her plate, confused by her own reaction to this man she had only just met. I will walk you to Mrs. Henderson's after breakfast, Zach said, breaking into her thoughts. It is not far, but I want to make sure you get there safely. Your interview is at 10, correct? Yes, at the schoolhouse. You do not have to trouble yourself, Mr. Ramsey. You have already done more than enough. It is no trouble. He met her eyes, and Lydia felt something shift in her chest at the warmth she saw there. Besides, I want to make sure you make it to the right door this time. His slight smile took any sting out of the words, and Lydia found herself smiling back. I suppose I deserve that. I promise I am usually much better with directions when I am not half drowned and exhausted. They set out for Pine Street after breakfast, Zach carrying Lydia's small travel bag despite her protests. The morning was cool and fresh after the rain, with puddles reflecting the clearing sky and birds singing in the trees. As they walked, Zach pointed out various landmarks and buildings, orienting her to the town. That is the general store run by Mr. Peterson. He is fair and honest. The bank is there on the corner and the sheriff's office is just down that way. The church is on the hill. Pastor Williams gives a good sermon, though he tends to run long. And there is the saloon, which you will probably want to avoid. Are you worried I might develop a gambling problem, Mr. Ramsey? Lydia teased, surprising herself with her own boldness. Zach chuckled, a warm sound that made something flutter in Lydia's stomach. I am more worried about the cowboys who drink too much on Saturday nights. They are mostly harmless, but they can be rowdy. They arrived at Mrs. Henderson's boarding house, a neat two-story structure with a wraparound porch and cheerful yellow curtains in the windows. Mrs. Henderson herself answered the door, a thin woman in her 50s with sharp eyes that took in Zach and Lydia with open curiosity. You must be Miss Garrison. We expected you yesterday evening. I apologize, Mrs. Henderson. The stagecoach broke down, and by the time I walked to town, the weather was so terrible that I ended up at the wrong address. Mr. Ramsey was kind enough to provide shelter for the night with his neighbor as chaperone. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened slightly. I see. Well, come in then. We will get you settled. Mr. Ramsey, thank you for looking after our new teacher, though I suppose we should not call her that until after the interview. Zach tipped his hat to both women. Miss Garrison, good luck with your interview. I am sure you will do fine. Thank you, Mr. Ramsey, for everything. Their eyes met and held for a moment longer than necessary, and Lydia felt that strange flutter again. Then Zach was walking away and Mrs. Henderson was ushering her inside and up the stairs to a small but clean room that would be hers if she stayed in Wilson. The interview at 10 o'clock went better than Lydia had dared hope. Mrs. Patterson and the other board members were impressed with her credentials and her clear passion for teaching. They asked thoughtful questions about her methods and philosophy, and Lydia felt herself relaxing as she talked about the subject closest to her heart. By the end of the hour, they offered her the position starting the following Monday, with a salary that was modest but fair, and would allow her to pay for her room at Mrs. Henderson's with enough left over to save a little each month. Lydia spent the next few days settling into Wilson and preparing for her new position. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house held 3 other women: Clara, who worked at the general store, Ruth, who was a seamstress, and Emma, who helped her mother run the town's only restaurant. They welcomed Lydia warmly and invited her to join them for meals and evening conversations, and Lydia felt herself beginning to think of Wilson as home. Yet despite her busy days, she found her thoughts returning again and again to Zachary Ramsey. She had not seen him since that first morning, though she had asked Mrs. Talbot about him when the older woman had stopped by to check on her. Zach's ranch keeps him plenty busy, Mrs. Talbot had explained. He raises horses, some of the finest in the territory. Folks come from all over to buy his stock. He comes into town on Saturdays usually, for supplies and such. Saturday arrived with clear skies and mild temperatures perfect for late September of 1882. Lydia had spent the morning at the schoolhouse, preparing her classroom and familiarizing herself with the materials available. She was walking back toward the boarding house when she heard her name called and turned to see Zach riding down the main street on a beautiful bay horse. He dismounted with easy grace and led the horse over to where she stood. Miss Garrison, I heard you got the teaching position. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. I start on Monday. I am both excited and terrified. The children will love you. He said it with such simple confidence that Lydia felt some of her nervousness ease. I was wondering if you might allow me to show you around the area tomorrow after church. There are some pretty spots around Wilson that you might enjoy seeing, and it would help you get your bearings. Lydia's heart began to beat faster. That would be very kind of you. I would enjoy that. I will call for you at noon then if that suits you. It suits me very well. They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to end the conversation, until Zach's horse nudged him with its nose, making them both laugh. I should get my supplies loaded and head back to the ranch. I will see you tomorrow, Miss Garrison. Lydia, she said impulsively. Please call me Lydia. His smile was slow and warm. Lydia, and you should call me Zach. That evening, the other women at the boarding house noticed Lydia's distracted mood and pressed her for details until she confessed about the planned outing. Clara and Ruth exchanged knowing looks while Emma grinned openly. Zach Ramsey is quite the catch, Clara said. Half the unmarried women in Wilson have tried to get his attention, but he never seems interested. You must have made quite an impression. It is just a friendly outing to show me the area, Lydia protested, but she could feel her cheeks warming. If you say so, Ruth said with a smile, but you might want to wear your blue dress tomorrow. It brings out your eyes. Sunday morning found Lydia at church, hyper-aware of Zach sitting 3 rows behind her. She tried to focus on Pastor Williams's sermon, but her mind kept wandering to the afternoon ahead. When the service ended, several townspeople approached to introduce themselves and welcome her to Wilson, and Lydia was touched by the genuine warmth of the community. Zach was waiting outside when she finally emerged, holding the reins of 2 horses. One was the bay she had seen him riding yesterday, and the other was a gentle-looking gray mare. I thought we could ride out to Miller's Creek. It is about 2 miles from here, with some of the prettiest views in the county. I should warn you that I am not the most experienced rider, Lydia admitted as Zach helped her mount the gray mare. Daisy here is as gentle as they come. She will take good care of you. They rode out of town at an easy pace, following a well-worn trail that wound through golden prairie grass and scattered stands of cottonwood trees. Zach pointed out landmarks and told her stories about the land and the people who lived there. He had a quiet way of speaking that made Lydia lean closer to catch every word, and she found herself fascinated by the depth of his knowledge and his obvious love for this place. Miller's Creek turned out to be a narrow stream running through a small canyon, with red rock walls rising on either side and water so clear that Lydia could see every stone on the bottom. Zach spread a blanket under a cottonwood tree, and they sat in the dappled shade, sharing the lunch that misses. Talbot had packed for them. This is beautiful, Lydia said, watching sunlight dance on the water. Thank you for bringing me here. I used to come here a lot when I first moved to Wilson, Zach said, pulling up a blade of grass and twirling it between his fingers. It was a good place to think and plan for the future. I was pretty angry back then, angry at the world for taking my family, angry at myself for not being able to save them. This place helped me find some peace. The vulnerability in his admission made Lydia's heart ache. I am so sorry about your parents. That must have been terrible. It was a long time ago. I was 19, thought I knew everything. Fever swept through the ranch where we were all working, and by the time it was done, both my parents and 2 of my brothers were gone. I had one brother left, Samuel, but he headed west to California, wanted to get as far from the memories as possible. Last I heard, he was working on a ranch near Sacramento. We write sometimes, but it is not the same as having family close. Is that why you came to Wilson, to start over? More or less. I worked on ranches all through Texas and Kansas, saved every penny I could. When I heard about land for sale here, I scraped together enough for a down payment and took a chance. That was 5 years ago, and I have been building ever since. It is hard work, and there are days when I wonder if I am crazy trying to do it all alone, but it is mine, you know. Something I built with my own hands. Lydia understood that need better than he might expect. That is why I became a teacher. My father wanted me to marry a merchant in our town, someone suitable and stable. But I wanted something that was mine, a way to support myself and make a difference. When I told him I was going to teacher's college, we had the biggest fight we had ever had. He said I was being foolish and stubborn. We barely spoke for a year. Did you make peace with him before you came here? Eventually. He still thinks I am too independent for my own good, but he stopped trying to change my mind. My mother was more supportive, though she worried about me being alone. I think she hoped I would find teaching and a husband, but in that order. Zach looked at her with those warm, whiskey-colored eyes, and Lydia felt her breath catch. There is nothing wrong with being independent. Takes courage to go after what you want. They talked for hours, sharing stories about their pasts and their hopes for the future. Lydia learned that Zach wanted to expand his ranch, to breed horses that would be known throughout Kansas and beyond. Zach learned that Lydia dreamed of opening a library in Wilson someday, a place where children and adults alike could discover the worlds contained in books. The conversation flowed easily, without any of the awkwardness or forced politeness that usually marked new acquaintances. When the sun began to sink lower in the sky, Zach reluctantly suggested they head back. I do not want Mrs. Henderson thinking I kept you out too late. She runs a respectable establishment. You sound like you have experience with Mrs. Henderson's opinions, Lydia teased as they packed up. Let us just say she made her thoughts very clear when I brought you to her door that first morning. I got a lecture about propriety and proper behavior around young ladies. You never told me that. How embarrassing. Do not be embarrassed. I set her straight that everything was above board, and Mrs. Talbot backed me up. Your reputation is intact, I promise. They rode back to Wilson as the sky turned shades of pink and gold, and when Zach helped Lydia dismount in front of the boarding house, his hands lingered at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. I enjoyed today, he said quietly. Would you allow me to call on you again? I would like that very much. How about Wednesday evening? I could take you to dinner at the restaurant. Emma's mother makes the best pot roast in the territory. Wednesday would be perfect. Lydia's first week of teaching flew by in a whirlwind of names to learn, lessons to plan, and routines to establish. She had 15 students ranging from ages 6 to 14, and they were a lively, curious bunch who tested her patience and warmed her heart in equal measure. By Friday afternoon, she was exhausted but deeply satisfied with her choice to come to Wilson. Wednesday evening arrived, and Zach appeared at the boarding house promptly at 6, clean-shaven and wearing a pressed shirt that suggested he had made an effort. Lydia had indeed worn her blue dress, and the way Zach's eyes lit up when he saw her made her glad she had listened to Clara's advice. The restaurant was busy, filled with families and couples enjoying their evening meals. Emma's mother, Mrs. Carson, greeted them warmly and seated them at a small table near the window. The pot roast was indeed delicious, and Lydia found herself relaxing into the pleasure of good food and even better company. How was your first week? Zach asked as they ate. Challenging but wonderful. The children are sweet, though a few of the older boys like to test boundaries. I had to separate Tommy Martin and Jack Sullivan 3 times because they could not stop talking and distracting the others. Zach grinned. Tommy and Jack have been best friends since they were in diapers. Good kids, but they feed off each other's energy. Their fathers are the same way. I will have to remember that. How has your week been? Busy. I have been breaking in a young stallion, beautiful animal but stubborn as they come. Reminds me of someone else I know who is independent and does not like being told what to do. Lydia raised her eyebrows. Are you comparing me to a stubborn horse, Mr. Ramsey? I would not dream of it, he said, but his eyes were dancing with amusement. I am merely noting that both you and the horse know what you want and are not afraid to go after it." They fell into easy conversation about everything and nothing, the kind of talk that reveals character and creates connection. Zach asked about her favorite books, and Lydia found herself describing her love of Shakespeare and Austen. Zach admitted he preferred history and memoirs of Western exploration, but confessed he would read one of her favorites if she recommended it. "Really? You would read Pride and Prejudice just because I suggested it?" "I would. Though you might have to explain some of the British social customs. I am just a simple Kansas cowboy." "There is nothing simple about you, Zach Ramsey." The words came out more seriously than Lydia had intended, and she saw surprise and something deeper flash across Zach's face. He reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and strong around hers. "There is nothing simple about you either, Lydia Garrison. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever met." Lydia felt heat rise to her cheeks, but she did not pull her hand away. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave enough to travel halfway across the country alone for a dream. I know you are kind enough to worry about propriety even when you were half frozen and desperate for shelter. I know you care deeply about your students and your work. And I know that when you walked into my life, wrong door and all, everything shifted. I cannot stop thinking about you, Lydia." "I do not want to stop thinking about you." Her heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "I cannot stop thinking about you either. I keep trying to tell myself it is too soon, that we have only known each other a week, but then I see you and everything else just falls away." They sat there holding hands across the table, oblivious to the other diners and the curious glances sent their way. When they finally left the restaurant, Zach offered his arm, and Lydia took it, feeling the solid strength of him beside her as they walked slowly back to the boarding house. At the front door, Zach turned to face her, and Lydia could see him struggling with something. "I know this is fast. I know we should probably take more time and be sensible. But I have never been much for doing what I should when my heart is telling me something different. Lydia, I would very much like to court you properly, with the intention of making you my wife someday if you will have me. I am not a rich man and ranch life can be hard, but I promise I would spend every day trying to make you happy." Lydia felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes, yes, I would like that very much." Zach's face broke into the biggest smile she had seen from him yet, and he lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "You have made me the happiest man in Kansas, Lydia Garrison. I will do everything in my power to be worthy of your trust. You already are." Over the next few months, Zach and Lydia fell into a pattern of courtship that felt both exciting and comfortable. Zach came to town 3 or 4 times a week, sometimes for dinner, sometimes just to walk with Lydia after school let out. On Saturdays, they would ride out to different spots around Wilson, exploring the landscape and learning more about each other with every conversation. Lydia met Zach's horses and fell in love with the ranch, with its neat corrals and sturdy barn, the small but well-built house that Zach had constructed himself. He introduced her to his ranch hands, 2 brothers named James and Robert who helped with the daily work and teased Zach mercilessly about being smitten. "Never seen the boss smile so much," James said to Lydia one Saturday when she visited the ranch. "Whatever you are doing, keep it up. Makes him a lot easier to work with." Zach showed Lydia everything about his operation, explaining how he selected breeding pairs and trained the young horses. She could see the pride and love he had for his work, and she understood it because she felt the same way about teaching. They were both building something meaningful, both working toward futures that mattered. The town of Wilson watched the courtship with approval and no small amount of interest. Mrs. Henderson pronounced herself satisfied that Zach was a gentleman and that Lydia was conducting herself properly. Mrs. Talbot beamed like a proud mother whenever she saw them together. Even the schoolchildren noticed, and Lydia had to gently redirect their excited questions about whether she was going to marry Mr. Ramsey. Winter arrived early that year, with snow falling in mid-November and temperatures dropping steadily. Zach worried about Lydia walking to and from school in the cold, so he started meeting her each afternoon with the wagon, driving her safely back to the boarding house. Mrs. Henderson allowed him to come inside for coffee on those cold evenings, and he would sit in the parlor with Lydia and the other women, listening to their chatter and looking completely content. It was during one of those evenings in early December that Zach pulled Lydia aside, his expression nervous in a way she had rarely seen. "Walk with me for a moment. I know it is cold, but I promise it will not take long." Lydia bundled into her coat and followed him out onto the porch. The sun had set, and stars were beginning to appear in the clear winter sky. Zach took both of her hands in his breath making clouds in the cold air. "Lydia, we have been courting for 3 months now, and every day I am more certain that you are the woman I want to spend my life with. I know we talked about taking our time, and if you need more time, I will wait as long as you need. But I have to ask, Lydia Garrison, will you marry me? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my days trying to make you happy?" Lydia felt tears freeze on her cheeks as she nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Finally, she managed, "Yes. Yes, Zach, I will marry you." He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and then he kissed her for the first time. It was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and Lydia felt like her heart might burst from the joy of it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless and smiling, Zach reached into his pocket and produced a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said softly. "The only thing I kept after she died. I would be honored if you would wear it. Zach, I love it. I love you." "I love you too, Lydia, so much." They went back inside to share the news, and the boarding house erupted in excited congratulations. Clara and Ruth and Emma hugged Lydia and admired the ring, while Mrs. Henderson actually smiled and said she had known from the beginning that this would happen. Word spread quickly through Wilson, and by the next day, it seemed like everyone in town wanted to offer their congratulations and best wishes. They decided to marry after Christmas, giving them time to make arrangements and for Lydia to write to her parents about her engagement. The letter she received back from her mother was full of happiness and relief that Lydia had found someone who clearly loved and valued her. Her father's message, included at the end of her mother's letter, was shorter but no less meaningful. "If he makes you happy, then I am happy for you. I wish I could be there to see my daughter married, but I trust your judgment, Lydia. You always did know your own mind." The weeks leading up to the wedding were a flurry of preparations. Ruth sewed Lydia a beautiful ivory dress with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Mrs. Carson insisted on making the wedding cake. Pastor Williams agreed to perform the ceremony at the church on the afternoon of January 15, 1883. Zach worked furiously to add on to his house, building an additional room and making improvements so that Lydia would have a comfortable home. Lydia continued teaching up until 3 days before the wedding, when the school board kindly gave her time off to prepare. Her students presented her with a quilt they had worked on secretly with their mothers, each square decorated with drawings and messages. Lydia cried when they gave it to her, overwhelmed by the love and acceptance she had found in this town that had been completely foreign to her just a few months ago. The wedding day dawned clear and cold, with brilliant sunshine reflecting off the snow. Lydia dressed in her new gown with Clara and Ruth and Emma helping, all of them laughing and crying at the same time. Mrs. Henderson gave Lydia a pearl necklace that had belonged to her own mother, insisting that every bride needed something special to wear. The church was packed with what seemed like half of Wilson in attendance. Lydia walked down the aisle alone, having no father present to give her away, but she did not feel alone. The whole community had embraced her, and their presence was a kind of blessing all its own. Zach waited at the altar in his best suit, his hair neatly combed and his face shining with love and pride as he watched her approach. When she reached him, he took her hand and whispered, "You are so beautiful. I am the luckiest man alive." Pastor Williams performed a lovely ceremony, speaking about love and commitment and the journey that Lydia and Zach were beginning together. When it came time for vows, Zach's voice was steady and sure as he promised to love and cherish Lydia for all his days. Lydia's voice shook slightly with emotion, but she met his eyes and made the same promises, meaning every word with her whole heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Zach, you may kiss your bride." Zach cupped Lydia's face gently in his hands and kissed her with a tenderness that made several of the watching women sigh. When they turned to face the congregation as husband and wife, the church erupted in applause and cheers. The reception was held at Mrs. Carson's restaurant, which she had closed to the public for the afternoon. There was food and music and dancing, and Lydia felt like she was floating through it all, anchored only by Zach's hand in hers. They danced their first dance as husband and wife to a fiddle tune played by Mr. Peterson from the general store, and Lydia rested her head against Zach's chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. As the afternoon wore into evening, Zach leaned down and whispered in her ear, "Ready to go home, Mrs. Ramsey, Mrs. Ramsey," Lydia repeated, loving the sound of it. "Yes, let us go home." They said their goodbyes and thank yous to everyone, then climbed into the wagon that Zach had outfitted with extra blankets and pillows for the ride to the ranch. The sun was setting as they left Wilson, painting the snow-covered prairie in shades of pink and gold. At the ranch, Zach had prepared everything beautifully. A fire crackled in the fireplace, and candles flickered on the table where a simple supper waited. He had hung the quilt from her students on the wall of their bedroom, and Lydia felt tears spring to her eyes again at the thoughtfulness of it. "I wanted you to feel at home here," Zach said, pulling her close. "This is your place now, Lydia, our place." "It already feels like home," she assured him. "Anywhere with you feels like home." They ate supper together in comfortable silence, stealing glances and smiles, both a little nervous about the night ahead. When the meal was finished, Zach took Lydia's hand and led her to their bedroom. He was gentle and patient, taking his time, and Lydia felt herself relaxing into his embrace, trusting him completely. Later, as they lay together in the darkness with Lydia's head on Zach's chest, he ran his fingers through her hair and said, "Thank you for knocking on the wrong door that night." "Best mistake that ever happened to me." Lydia laughed softly. "Best mistake that ever happened to me too, though I still maintain that it was your door that was in the wrong place, not my knocking. We can agree to disagree on that point, Mrs. Ramsey." She tilted her head up to kiss him. "I love you, Zach. I love you too, Lydia. Always." The winter passed in a haze of happiness. Lydia returned to teaching in February, and Zach would drive her to and from school each day, refusing to let her walk in the cold. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire together, Lydia correcting papers or reading aloud while Zach worked on mending tack or going over the ranch accounts. On Saturdays, they would ride out to check on the horses together, and Zach taught Lydia more about ranching than she had ever imagined knowing. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and the birth of several foals. Lydia loved watching the young horses gambol in the fields, their legs still wobbly and uncertain. Zach was in his element during foaling season, staying up late to monitor the mares and being present for each birth. Lydia often stayed up with him, bringing him coffee and sandwiches, content just to be near him. It was in late April that Lydia began to suspect she might be pregnant. She waited a few more weeks to be certain before telling Zach, wanting to be sure before she got his hopes up. Finally, in early May, she asked Mrs. Talbot to come out to the ranch, and the older woman confirmed what Lydia had suspected. "You are definitely expecting, my dear. I would say the baby will come sometime in November or December. How do you feel? Excited? Nervous? A little overwhelmed?" "I have not told Zach yet. I wanted to be certain first." Mrs. Talbot patted her hand. "He is going to be over the moon. That man wants a family more than anything, though I do not think he let himself hope for it until you came along." That evening, Lydia waited until after supper to share her news. Zach was sitting at the table going over some breeding records when she came up behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. "Zach, I have something to tell you." He turned in his chair to look at her, immediately picking up on the importance in her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "Nothing is wrong. Everything is very, very right." She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. "We are going to have a baby. In November, Mrs. Talbot thinks." For a moment, Zach just stared at her, his eyes wide with shock. Then his face broke into the biggest smile Lydia had ever seen, and he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby. Lydia, we are going to have a baby. I cannot believe it. This is the best news. I am so happy." "Are you happy? How are you feeling? Do you need to sit down? Should you be working so hard at school?" Lydia laughed at the barrage of questions, overwhelmed by his joy and concern. "I am very happy. I feel fine, just a little tired sometimes. And yes, I can keep teaching for now." Mrs. Talbot said everything seems normal and healthy. Zach cupped her face in his hands and kissed her tenderly. "I love you so much. You have given me everything I ever wanted. A home, a partner, and now a family. I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I thank God every day that you knocked on my door." "The wrong door," Lydia reminded him with a smile. "The exactly right door," he corrected. "It was always the right door." The news of the pregnancy spread through Wilson quickly, and Lydia was touched by the outpouring of support and excitement from the community. Women who had been friendly acquaintances became close friends, offering advice and hand-me-down baby clothes and stories about their own pregnancies. The school board arranged for a temporary teacher to take over Lydia's classes when the time came, and assured her that her position would be waiting when she was ready to return. Summer passed in a blur of preparations for the baby. Zach built a cradle with his own hands, carving delicate designs into the wood. Lydia sewed tiny gowns and blankets, marveling at how small they were. They talked endlessly about names and dreams for their child, and Lydia felt her love for Zach deepen even more as she watched him prepare for fatherhood with such care and dedication. By October, Lydia's belly had grown round and full, and she had to stop teaching as moving around became more difficult. She spent her days at the ranch, helping with lighter chores and cooking meals for Zach and the ranch hands. James and Robert treated her like precious china, rushing to help her with anything heavy and scolding Zach if they thought he was letting her work too hard. The baby came on a cold night in late November, arriving 2 weeks earlier than expected. Lydia's labor started just after supper, and Zach immediately sent Robert to fetch Mrs. Talbot while James rode for the doctor. Mrs. Talbot arrived first and took charge with calm efficiency, sending Zach out of the room when his pacing and worried questions became too much. "Go boil some water and gather clean towels," she ordered. "Make yourself useful instead of making your wife nervous." The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Zach wore a path in the floor with his pacing, and James and Robert tried to distract him with conversation and coffee, but nothing worked. Finally, just as the sun was rising, they heard a baby's cry, strong and healthy. Mrs. Talbot emerged from the bedroom with a smile. "You have a son, Zach. Both mother and baby are doing well. Give me a moment to get them settled, and then you can come in." A son. Zach felt tears stream down his face as the words sank in. He had a son. When Mrs. Talbot beckoned him in, he entered the bedroom on shaky legs to find Lydia propped up on pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She looked up when he entered, and her smile was radiant. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Zach approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. His son had a dusting of dark hair and a red, wrinkled face, and he was the most beautiful thing Zach had ever seen besides his wife. When Lydia carefully transferred the baby into his arms, Zach felt something in his chest crack wide open, a love so fierce and overwhelming that it brought fresh tears to his eyes. "He is perfect," Zach whispered. "You are amazing, Lydia. Thank you for him. Thank you for everything." "What should we name him?" Lydia asked. "We talked about so many names, but I cannot decide. You choose." Zach looked down at his son, then back at his wife. "What about Matthew? It means gift from God, and that is exactly what he is." "Matthew Ramsey," Lydia said, trying it out. "I love it." "Welcome to the world, Matthew." They spent the next few days in a haze of exhausted happiness, learning to care for their newborn son. Matthew was a hungry, fussy baby at first, keeping them up at all hours, but neither Zach nor Lydia minded. Zach would pace the floor with Matthew in the middle of the night, singing off key lullabies and talking to him about horses and ranching, and how lucky he was to have such an amazing mother. Mrs. Talbot stayed for the first week, helping with cooking and cleaning and offering advice on caring for the baby. Friends from town stopped by with food and gifts, and Lydia was overwhelmed by the generosity and kindness. When Christmas arrived a month later, it was the best one either Zach or Lydia had ever experienced, just the three of them in their small home, Matthew sleeping in the cradle by the fire. "This time last year I was planning our wedding," Lydia said as she and Zach sat together on Christmas evening watching their son sleep. "So much has changed in such a short time." "Everything has changed," Zach agreed. "A year and a half ago I was alone in this house, thinking my life was complete, and then you knocked on my door and I realized I had not even known what I was missing." "We have been very lucky," Lydia said, "to find each other to build this life together." "It is not luck, Lydia. It is us. We chose each other and we keep choosing each other every day. That is not luck. That is love." The years that followed were full and rich, marked by both challenges and joys. Lydia returned to teaching when Matthew was 6 months old, and Mrs. Talbot would watch the baby during the day. When Matthew was 2, Lydia discovered she was pregnant again, and their daughter Sarah was born in the spring of 1886, a tiny thing with Lydia's blonde hair and Zach's brown eyes. The ranch prospered as Zach's reputation for breeding quality horses spread throughout Kansas and into neighboring territories. He hired more help and expanded his operation, always consulting with Lydia about major decisions. She became his partner in every sense of the word, helping with the business side of ranching while continuing to teach. Matthew grew into a sturdy, curious boy who followed his father everywhere, already showing an aptitude with horses that made Zach beam with pride. Sarah was more reserved, preferring books and drawing to the outdoors, reminding Zach of Lydia with her quiet intelligence. When Sarah was 3, another son arrived, Daniel, and the house was always full of noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Wilson continued to grow around them, the railroad bringing commerce and more families. Lydia finally got her library in 1890, a small building funded by donations and run by volunteers. She spent countless hours there, organizing books and helping children discover the joy of reading. Zach supported her dream completely, even building new shelves and helping move furniture when the library needed to expand. As their children grew, Zach and Lydia made sure to teach them about hard work and kindness, about treating others with respect regardless of their station in life. They took them to church every Sunday and made sure they got good educations. Matthew eventually took over more responsibilities on the ranch, while Sarah became a teacher like her mother, and Daniel showed an aptitude for training the more difficult horses. The years brought challenges too. There were droughts that made ranching difficult, and illnesses that scared them, and the normal struggles of raising children and running a business. But through it all, Zach and Lydia faced everything together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1903, Zach took Lydia back to Miller's Creek, the place where they had first opened their hearts to each other. They rode out on a warm spring day, just the two of them, leaving their nearly grown children to manage things at home. The creek looked much the same as it had that first day, the water still clear and the cottonwood trees still providing shade. They spread a blanket under the same tree where they had sat all those years ago, and Zach pulled Lydia into his arms. Her hair had some gray in it now, and there were lines around her eyes from years of smiling, but to him, she was still the most beautiful woman in the world. 20 years, Lydia marveled. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like forever. The best 20 years of my life, Zach said. You know, I still think about that night sometimes. You standing on my porch in the rain, half drowned and desperate. If you had counted right and gone to the correct building, we might never have met. I do not think that is true, Lydia said. I think we would have found each other somehow. Some things are just meant to be. You really believe that? I do. I believe you were my destiny, Zach Ramsey. The cowboy inside that wrong door changed everything for me, but it was exactly right. You were exactly right. He kissed her then, with all the passion and tenderness of their first kiss and all the kisses in between. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling, content in the life they had built together. They stayed at the creek for hours, talking about their children and the ranch and their dreams for the future. Matthew had recently announced his engagement to a sweet girl from town, which meant there would be grandchildren eventually. Sarah was considering attending a women's college in the East, which scared Lydia but also made her proud. Daniel was only 13 but already talking about breeding championship horses. We did good, did we not? Zach asked as the sun began to set. With the kids, with the ranch, with everything. We did very good, Lydia agreed. But we are not done yet. We have a lot more years ahead of us, Zach Ramsey. I plan to grow old with you. I plan to let you, he said, helping her to her feet. Come on, Mrs. Ramsey, let us go home. They rode back to the ranch as twilight fell, and Lydia looked at the house in the distance, lights glowing warmly in the windows. She thought about the scared, exhausted woman she had been that rainy night so many years ago, knocking on the wrong door with no idea that her entire life was about to change. She thought about all the moments that had led from there to here, all the choices and chances and blessings that had shaped their journey. Thank you, she said suddenly, and Zach looked at her with surprise. For what? For opening the door, for taking me in, for choosing me, for loving me. For all of it, Lydia, I should be thanking you. You are the one who gave me everything. We gave each other everything, she corrected. That is what love is it not? Giving everything and receiving everything in return. He reached over and took her hand, riding the rest of the way home with their fingers intertwined. When they arrived, their children spilled out of the house to greet them, full of stories about their day and questions about the ride. Zach and Lydia dismounted and were immediately surrounded by the noise and energy of their family, and Lydia felt her heart overflow with gratitude. This was the life she had built from that one mistake, that one wrong door in a rainstorm. This home, this family, this love that had grown and deepened over 2 decades. She looked at Zach over the heads of their children and saw him looking back at her with the same love and wonder he had shown on their wedding day. The years continued to pass, bringing more changes and more blessings. Matthew married his sweetheart Emma, who was not the Emma from the boarding house but a different Emma, the daughter of a rancher from a neighboring county. They built a house on the far edge of Zach's property and started their own family, giving Zach and Lydia their first grandchild, a boy named Zachary after his grandfather, in 1905. Sarah did go east to college, which terrified Lydia but filled her with pride. She studied literature and education, and when she returned to Kansas, she brought with her new ideas about teaching and a passion for opening schools in rural areas. She eventually married a professor she met at college, a kind man named Henry who loved her intelligence and independence. Daniel grew into a skilled horseman who took the ranch to new heights, breeding horses that won awards at shows throughout the Midwest. He married late, at 30, to a widow with 2 children of her own, and together they created a blended family full of love and laughter. Through it all, Zach and Lydia remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew older together, their hair turning gray and then white, their steps becoming slower but their love never diminishing. On their 40th anniversary in 1923, their children and grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a huge celebration, with over 50 people crowding into the house and yard. Zach stood up to make a toast, his hand shaking slightly with age but his voice still strong. 40 years ago, I married the woman who had knocked on my door 6 months earlier, looking like a drowned cat and asking for Mrs. Henderson. Laughter rippled through the crowd, especially from the grandchildren who had heard this story many times. I opened that door and found my entire future standing there, Zach continued, his eyes finding Lydia in the crowd. Everything good in my life, everyone here today exists because of that moment, because your grandmother had the courage to start over in a new place. Because she knocked on the wrong door, and I was lucky enough to be the cowboy inside who got to change her destination forever. But the truth is, she changed my destination too. She gave me love and family and purpose. She made me better than I ever could have been alone. So this toast is to Lydia, my wife, my partner, my everything. Thank you for 40 years of happiness. Thank you for our beautiful family. Thank you for knocking on my door. Everyone raised their glasses and Lydia stood to embrace Zach, tears streaming down her face. I would knock on that door 1,000 times over, she whispered in his ear. You were always my destination, Zach. I just did not know it until you opened that door. The party went on into the evening, with music and dancing and stories shared across generations. Lydia sat in her favorite chair, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and felt a deep sense of completion. This was what she had dreamed of all those years ago when she had been young and searching for purpose. Not just a career or independence, but connection. Family. Love that endured and grew. As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red, Zach came to sit beside Lydia. They held hands and watched their family together, seeing their legacy carried forward in the faces of their children and grandchildren. "No regrets?" Zach asked softly. "Not a single one," Lydia replied. Just that I cannot live it all over again, experience it all fresh one more time. But then again, I would not trade a single memory or moment. It has all been perfect, Lydia, because it was with you." They sat together in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding vows 40 years ago. Around them, their family laughed and talked and celebrated, carrying forward the love story that had started with a wrong door on a rainy night. Zach and Lydia lived many more years together, watching their family continue to grow and thrive. They faced the challenges of old age with the same partnership that had defined their marriage, supporting each other through illnesses and losses, celebrating each new birth and marriage and achievement. When Zach finally passed away at the age of 87, surrounded by family in the bed he had shared with Lydia for over 50 years, his last words were, "Thank you for knocking on my door, my love. I will be waiting for you." Lydia lived another 3 years, spending her final days sharing stories with her great-grandchildren about the cowboy who had answered a desperate knock on a rainy night, and had given her a love story that spanned more than half a century. She spoke about courage and choices, about wrong doors that turn out to be exactly right, about building a life with someone through hard work and dedication and unwavering commitment. When she passed peacefully in her sleep at 90, her children found a letter she had written to be opened after her death. In it, she had written final words of wisdom and love to her family, but she had ended with a message specifically about Zach. "I want you all to know that the greatest adventure of my life was loving your father and grandfather. He was my home, my anchor, my greatest joy. We were blessed with a love that many people search for their whole lives and never find. If you learn nothing else from our story, learn this. When you find someone who makes you better, who stands beside you through every storm, who loves you not despite your flaws but because of your whole self, hold on tight and never let go. That is what your grandfather and I had. That is what I wish for all of you." She was buried beside Zach in the Wilson Cemetery, under a large oak tree with a view of the prairie they both loved. Their shared headstone reads simply, "Zachary and Lydia Ramsey. 2 hearts, 1 destiny, united by chance, bound by choice, forever in love." The ranch stayed in the family for generations, and the story of how Zach and Lydia met became family legend, told and retold at gatherings and celebrations. It became a reminder that sometimes the wrong turn leads to exactly the right place, that love can bloom from the most unexpected circumstances, and that when 2 people commit to building a life together, they can create something beautiful that lasts far beyond their own years. And in Wilson, Kansas, there remained to this day a small historical marker on what used to be Maple Street, telling the story of the schoolteacher who knocked on the wrong door and found true love with the cowboy inside. Young couples visiting the town would often seek it out, posing for pictures and making wishes that their own love stories would be as enduring and true as the one that started on that rainy September night in 1882. When Lydia Garrison knocked on door number 42, and Zachary Ramsey answered, and both of their destinies changed forever in the best possible way.